and welcome to our first lecture on Modernism and Postmodernism. So we'll begin with post-war Expressionism. So we've already looked at Expressionism and think German Expressionism, where they used color and form in this distorted way to express their feelings, to express their emotions, their inner world, as we've seen with numerous other artists, such as Van Gogh, etc., with post-impressionism. But with post-war Expressionism, we're going to see a little bit more of a negative reaction to, again, just the great homicide and death of World War I. We discussed how, even with the Spanish flu, how there were more people that died of the Spanish flu than those in combat. So there's this period across the globe of mourning, of, again, questioning what is society, what are we as humans when we're capable of this destruction. And so society, as we know it, has been flipped upside down again. The rug has been pulled out from underneath us. And so what we see with post-war Expressionism is this idea of existentialism. So this is Alberto Giacometti, main pointing number 5. And so when I hear the word existentialism, which is a philosophy, or an existential crisis, you'll probably hear that term more in general, I think of Giacometti's work. And so one aspect of existentialism is this idea that individuals, we have free will, we're responsible for our own development, etc., and acts of will. But then the negative aspect of this, a different way of looking at existentialism, is that there's no manual to human suffering. They're just trying to figure it out. And so they see human suffering and think of the suffering of the war as essentially, this aspect of existentialism is looking at the nature of anxiety, despair, grief, loneliness, isolation, and it's questioning meaning. What is our purpose? What is society's purpose? What is my purpose? And more from this element of alienation and being lost in the world's immensity. And so we see that with Alberto Giacometti. He's described as being the key existentialist artist. So what do I mean by that? We have this man pointing, this figure, but look at how elongated he is and how rough this is. And we can see this rough surface, as well as his elongation, seems like he's being compacted and stretched out, that these exterior forces are pushing against him. It's this really rough, agitated surface. This elongated figure seems swallowed up and pressed down by the space around them. He's also alienated, he's solitary, lost in the world's immensity. And so there's this sense of despair. There's this pervasive despair after World War II as people figure out how to move forward. And so we see this idea of existentialism with Giacometti. So you'll be able to recognize his artworks. It's quite distinctive. And Francis Bacon is another post-war expressionist and existentialist. And as you can see, he really utilizes these dark colors and this sense of horror, right, with this guy's face. So this is Study after Velázquez's portrait of Pope Innocent X. We have seen Velázquez. Here is his painting on the left, where he has created this realistic portrait of Pope Innocent X, versus here's Bacon's version. And so the main focus are these dark colors, this terrifying face, of this question of, many have argued it's this question of religion that's reflecting Bacon's inner beliefs. After seeing such destruction, he's questioning, what's this world like? Where was God during this? At least that's what some art historians claim. But we really see this sense of despair within this painting. Some have argued that the use of purple is associated with authority, decadence. And so he's playing off of that element here. But there's this real sense of horror here and despair. And we really, with both of these artworks, with our Giacometti as well as our Francis Bacon, we feel uncomfortable. We feel that sense of despair. We can easily read the emotions that the artists were trying to explain through art. We have this insight into their own feelings as a reaction to the war. Here's another version where you see this sliced open meat carcass, as you would see in a butcher shop. modeled off of the same idea of this Pope. And so there, again, is this sense of horror and despair. And so we're coming out of World War II as people try to determine what life is like. All right, let's talk about abstract expressionism, where this movement is completely abstract. So going back, we saw Vasily Kandinsky's Improvisation 28 and discussed how this is really arguably the first purely abstract artwork, and where his emotion is conveyed to an extent that could be this theme of salvation and the apocalypse, but he has synesthesia, so he's portraying what he sees when he hears this new music coming out. But he wants us to feel contemplative when we're looking at paintings, as he wants us to think, and he wrote extensively about this. And so we can see here's Arshil Gorky, circa 1943. This is an earlier artwork. It is under the realm of abstract expressionism, but abstract expressionism really takes off with our New York school with some of the artists we'll study next. But here we have Gorky, and he's seen as the founders, this transition of opening up this world of abstract expressionism. And as you can see, it's completely abstract. He had moved to New York City, and I should note, many people are moving to New York City during World War II, as you can see in 1943, a little bit before, but especially during and after. And these major figures in art, be it artists as well as art professors and art historians, and they're moving to the United States and specifically coming in through New York. And so we talked about how the Harlem Renaissance is the beginning of this opening up of new ideas, of experimentation in new forms of art. And so that continues. This is why New York is the center of the art world today, is because post-World War II, all of these key figures moved to New York City. And so we don't just have the artists, but we have them teaching other artists. So these ideas are being spread. We have art critics and art historians discussing these new elements and ideas and pushing them into society. And Arshil Gorky had moved here before the war, but again, he helps to set this transition. So the center of Western art shifted from Paris to New York City. All these key figures. And so we're going to see this emphasis on the formal elements of artwork. We're not trying to create anything representational or natural, realistic, etc. There's no sense of illusion. But if we're going to talk about abstract expressionism, we must talk about Clement Greenberg. So he is this art critic, this American art critic, and we've discussed the institution of art in these academies, and we didn't really have that in America. We do have some schools, but they haven't defined the art world as what we saw in Paris, or those who are reacting against the institution define the art world. But here we have art critics in America, and Greenberg, another guy, Panofsky, who moved to New York City during World War II, and other art critics, they essentially become like the institution in America. And so what they say about art goes. And so here we have Clement Greenberg, and he champions strict formalism, that there's this emphasis on artists' visual elements rather than the subject. We're done with representation. We're done with this clear subject matter, which we've seen for centuries. Instead, it's just about the formal elements. It's just about, about this formalism, essentially, or the property. And he rejects illusionism, and he embraces and really encourages and strictly encourages the properties of the medium. So the form and the medium. And who does he love? He loves Jackson Pollock. And so here is one of our schools of abstract expressionism. And he's part of this New York school. This group of artists, and they get together at this one bar in New York City, which was a working class bar. And so they're discussing these ideas. They're a pretty rough group. Jackson Pollock was an alcoholic. He died of alcoholism. They get into fights and stuff. I'm sure they were quite the riot to watch. But here we have Jackson Pollock, and he's part of this New York school, which is really championed by Clement Greenberg because it's all about the form in the medium. And so here we have what's called gestural or action painting. I'll refer to it as action painting because it is all about the action. So he rolls out this unprimed canvas. We can see it's still on the roll. He hasn't even cut it to its own width and dimensions. And it's action painting because look at how, he's stepping on the painting. He's leaning onto it. And he's dripping this paint all over. So you can see the hand of the artist. There's no representation here. There's no subject matter. It's just the medium, the paint on canvas, as well as the action of the artist. So we've rejected these previous ideas that we've seen in art. So here's our number one, 1950. His work is extremely recognizable. And again, heavily criticized because of the lack of a subject matter, because the lack of really anything other than the paint, right? That we can see the action of the artist. We can see his drips. We can see him just taking his paintbrush and just flicking it so that there's flicks and spots of art all over. So here's number one, 1950. And he is the key figure of Clement Greenberg's push for formalism. This is our first major avant-garde movement in the United States. So it sets the tone. And here's William de Kooning, Woman 1. We've seen women throughout the history of art, and consider how different this depiction of a woman is. So William de Kooning, he's playing on this archetypal image of women. There's the earliest image that's studied in art history is the Venus of Willendorf, which is this believed to be a fertility figure. She's rounded in her figure style, all the way to during this era, the idea of pinup girls with World War II with these pinup girls. And so he's commenting on this and he's playing off of these ideas of women. And so he has this very large woman, but she does not look inviting. Consider, especially with her face, these extremely large eyes, this distorted smile with her teeth showing. This is obviously not inviting, etc. He was known for spending years on his artwork where he would be constantly changing it. His wife described how he would paint a painting and then go in and scrape off the art and start all over again on the same one. And so it took him, as you can see, 2 years to create this painting. He just kept going back to it and kept redoing it. There's this, we see the brush strokes of the artist. There's this emphasis on the action of the artist. We can imagine him painting this in this rough brush stroke style and pressing down into it. There's the emphasis on the form, the paint, but this is obviously very different than Jackson Pollock. It's not quite our pure formalism, so keep that in mind. There's an emphasis on the color red throughout this painting. Some have argued that he's playing off of the idea of lipstick, which was really popular during this time period, bright red lipstick, which women are wearing. There's an emphasis on the eyes, some early votive statues, these prayer statues, some of the earliest art from ancient Mesopotamia have these very large eyes. So some have argued he's playing on the history of art. He's commenting on it from the earliest artworks that we have found. And so, with this big busted woman and this very kind of creepy smile that's lacking lips, despite lipstick being super popular at this time period. So it's a very different female figure than what we have seen before. And so there's also color field painting, which is, as you can see, there's no subject matter. And Mark Rothko is a good one to think of this. We have the Rothko Chapel here in Houston, where he was commissioned to create numerous artworks inside this chapel. It was recently renovated by his son, actually. or Under the Ideas of His Son. I highly recommend checking that out. It's by the Menil. And so here we have color field painting, which is different than our very clear brushstrokes that we saw in the hand of the artist of our action painting that we just looked at. And so his are very compositionally simple. It's focused on color. The color is the conveyor of meaning. And we have these somewhat of this expression of his feelings here. This idea of these basic human emotions coming through the formal element of color. This soft glow around the color. This one is red and blue. He does have a period where he creates mostly blue art, and during that time period, he was very depressed. He actually ended up committing suicide after this blue period. So we have some of those blue artworks in Houston. But these are what his artworks look like. You will see them in many major museums, including the MFA downtown. And so he's easily recognizable. But there's this really soft, ethereal glow to the colors, where there's not this strict difference between the different shades and colors, etc. And so he's focusing on the medium of paint. There is this sense of expression through the colors, but there's no official subject matter, of course. Here's Franz Klein, Mahoning. He is also an idea of this color field. But we do, of course, see more of the hand of the artist. So he has these things. Now, he was influenced by Japanese. Think back to when we studied East Asia and this idea of these Japanese scrolls and ink paintings. And with some of the literati paintings, they were done, with almost like this freestyle idea where, they were writing something in calligraphy quickly, where there's even like the spots of paint that represent how quickly they were writing, trying to get it out on paper. And so here we have this, doing this quickly and getting it out on paper, even with the drops of paint and the splatters during this process of creating this artwork. It's quite large. So think of that challenge that we saw earlier against the Institution of Art, with street painting. And here's Robert Motherwell. Similar, bit of color. This is his elegy to Spanish Republic during that Spanish Civil War that we talked about. He was a supporter of, he studies Marxism, and so he was a supporter of the communist side that was supporting the Spanish Republic, which lost. There's this elegy to it, there's what could have been. He describes this artwork as being, expressing his grief, etc. during the period. But you'll recognize his artwork kind of by these circles and these thick lines. Again, just about formalism, just about the color. There's no clear subject matter here. And all of them are expressing their feelings in one way or another. And we have a reaction to them. So here's our action painting versus our color field painting. Now tell me, which one do you think Greenberg did not like? He completely rejected de Kooning's Woman because it shows a figure. He says this should all only be about about formalism, medium. We shouldn't be representing figures any longer. And he really, he pretty much, he heavily criticized de Kooning, so much so that at that I referred to, where they would the New Yorks would hang out. At one point, de Kooning was there. And Greenberg showed up, and de Kooning went and punched him because Greenberg had wrote so extensively against de Kooning's work. Yet de Kooning knocked him. But here are our abstract expressionists that we've studied. So let's talk about post-painterly abstraction. This is to abstract expressionism. Helen Frankenthaler are some of our key artists here. Now, simply, difficult for us to see a difference. It's looks like color field painting. However, there are some different elements. Many of them are characterized. There's no, of course, subject matter, sense of space, etc. Action like abstract expressionism, but less feelings involved. It's just post-painterly abstraction. It's not expressionism. So they aren't trying to convey any feeling here. They are pulling off of Greenberg's ideas, and they're just exploring the medium. And we see that with Helen Frankenthaler, because light is the raw canvas. So a lot of times canvas will have something, on top of it to kind of, let me back up. The raw canvas, if you paint on it, it's going to soak up and seep into the canvas. And so oftentimes there's this kind of shield painted on top of it that then artists would paint atop. And so here we have this raw canvas that's being exposed. So she's really pointing out not just the medium of the paint, but also to what's being painted on the canvas. And she likes the fact that the paint soaks into the canvas. And she really played with the medium of paint, where she would take a painting and kind of move it in different ways so that the paint would start to drip down a little bit. We also have these clearer lines versus what we saw with our expressionists. And so, it's this focus on the medium. She used, she also would dilute the paint. You can see these different aspects here so that the canvas would show through the paint. So she's drawing our attention not only to the medium, but also to the canvas. She was inspired by the drip paintings of Pollock and how he would really interact with his artworks. So again, like I said, with her taking, picking up the canvas and moving it in certain ways so the paint would drip down. She's playing off of those ideas. But again, she wants the viewer to focus purely on colors and shapes in the artwork. We're not about any of the emotions. It's not expressionistic. So, and also we don't see the clear brushworks here. It's more like she would drip the paint and move it around. Whereas we saw the clear brush strokes, even with our color field painting. Frank Stella is another example. Here's his hyena stomp. He is one of the main founders of this movement. Again, where he's focusing on color. There's no emotion here. It's just color. And we see part of the canvas. So here's our post-painterly on the paint. Colors in the, so actually focusing on the colors and the shapes in the artwork, no motion. Here is Minimalism with Donald Judd. All of his works are entitled. Now look at these new mediums that we're looking at, brass and colored fluorescent plexiglass on steel brackets. So he is using newly made plexiglass, fluorescent plexiglass of popular material that is very new to the world. So he's a minimalist sculptor. You can see there's nothing here. There's no subject matter. There's no, explicit hand of the artist, etc. Instead, he just embraced spare, universal aesthetic to, suprematism and distill of Piet Mondrian, and how the focus is very simplistic. It's very minimal, and that's very universal. And so he's pulling off of those ideas. And he describes the advantages of sculpture over painting and using these industrial materials. He's not into this idea of illusionism. He sees that, instead of working on the flat surface, there's this actual space. And he says that that's more, powerful, that this three-dimensional object make it possible to see the materials and the different colors of these materials. He says, most of my work involves new materials, either recent inventions or things not used before in art. Little was done until lately with the range of industrial products. He's using these new, he's playing off of the idea of these industrialized products. They're mass-produced. And why can't this fluorescent plexiglass be art? And so he challenges our notions of art. Here's our second lecture on pop art. But before we discuss pop art, we're going to head to Britain and we're going to look at the independent group. It's kind of this precursor to it all. So here we have Eduardo Palozzi. It's a psychological fact. Pleasures help your disposition. Printed papers on card. This is part of this exhibit called This is Tomorrow. And here we are seeing an extremely different medium than what we have looked at before. We saw a little bit of this idea of a photo montage with Dada. We didn't really go in depth into it. I just kind of rinsed it. But here we have this photo montage, and it's solely of, women's magazines, Ladies' Home Journal, where he has pulled elements from here of, these new items that are now easily, purchasable, they're cheap, etc., they're mass-produced. This will make you happy. Here's this happy woman vacuuming her kitchen, with all these new devices. Here is this woman who's happily cleaning up her children's room. And so he's playing off of these new ideas of society, commercialism, it's never been before, and how it influences so much of our lives today. And this is new, the idea of, the consumer, etc., is really helping define society during this time period as it does today. We see the origin of this here. And so it's this playoff of consumerism, and that by purchasing these items, you will be. It's very avant-garde. We haven't seen, like I said, this in art. Why aren't these clippings art? This is tomorrow. This is today. This is the future. So he's challenging that. And so this is what is popular at the time period. And so it's this precursor of pop art. Here's Richard Hamilton's Just What Is It That Makes Today's Home So Different, So Appealing? So the same idea where he's pulling these popular notions. Our eyes are drawn to different elements of this painting. I'm going to start with this young romance poster. There's these romance books that are popular. So he has a poster here. Look at our Ford emblem. In the background, we see, this movie theater, of going to these popular movie theaters. Look again, we have this woman who's so happy vacuuming the stairs, ordinary cleaners which reach only this far. So it's this commentary on consumerism. We have this new player, as well as, look at this ham and this TV, etc. And so he's pulling off of these ideas of what's popular. The moon. And he's also, think of it, Tootsie Roll Pop, still popular today. And the figures here, he has this bodybuilder. So this is what's popular. Think of these notions of beauty, both the masculine and feminine, that are still today. And as well as, the female nude to an extent. And this is actually a pornographic image that he's pulled. And so he's commenting on these aspects of society that are brand new. To this period, to this time, that we haven't seen in the art world before. And it's the collage of all these different popular aspects of society. And challenging this art, challenging the norm. So let's check out pop art of the 1950s and 60s. Really peaked in the 60s. Here is Roy Lichtenstein's Hopeless. Oil and synthetic polymer paint on canvas. So think back to our George Seurat in Pointillism. Lichtenstein, this is a comic strip. Comic strips were extremely popular during this time period. And he has created this artwork by, tiny little paintbrushes. Dots. So it's not that he printed this. He painted these little tiny dots that he's created, as well as the, solid colors. But there's, it's extremely dramatic. That's the way it should have begun, but it's hopeless. I should say, so let me back up. It's not that he was like Seurat, where he was painting every single dot by himself. He did use stencils with these perforated dot patterns that he would, brush his paintbrush across the stencil. And that's for continuity. So forget what I said with him painting each by hand. It was a stencil and that he did over. But think of how grounded in consumer culture this is. Mass media, popular culture, pop art is about popular culture, and comic strips are popular. So this is a large-scale painting. Anytime that you see these comic strip type paintings in any museum, common are modes of entertainment, be it comic strips or books and TV, etc. So here we have Andy Warhol. He helps to define pop art. He's kind of the key pop art artist. Here's our Marilyn diptych. Oil acrylic and silkscreen enamel on canvas. Now we haven't seen silkscreen before. He is pulling elements of popular culture and claiming them as high art. So Marilyn Monroe, of course, very popular. And so he just repeats this image, and it's printed with this silk screen. So what's also important to note about Andy Warhol is he termed the idea 15 minutes of fame. That concept was made and stated by Andy Warhol. And he said, everyone would get their 15 minutes of fame. And so think of how true that is today with this idea of 15 minutes of fame. And how he called it. He understood pop culture. He, has this understanding of that aspect of human nature. He also is playing off of the idea of the artist's hand in art. And so what he actually has is what he referred to as the factory, where he has these groups of people, be it upcoming artists or kind of, people who are part of his crowd, how they are the ones actually doing the work. They're the ones doing the printing. They're setting it up, etc. That it's actually his factory that is producing these artworks and not him. His hand is not on this. He created the concept of this, but it is his factory, other people, that actually produced the artwork. So taking away, the hand of the artist, even though it's under, his name, Andy Warhol. He's critiquing American consumerism. He's also taking away the glamour of these popular figures. This repeated figure, we get tired of it to an extent, as well as the colors that we have, these bright, bold colors that are not aesthetically pleasing. And so he's, claiming that he's taking away the ego, that he's, humbling people to that extent. Andy Warhol, complicated figure. I do not like him. In his factory, there was a lot of drug use in which he very much encouraged. And so many of these artists got into very hard drugs under, his encouragement. We'll look at Basquiat in our next unit as an example. And it was kind of one of those, if you do drugs, you die by the age of 27. There's many figures in recent history, the 2 decades, that die at age 27 because of drug use. So many people under Andy Warhol's, fame and trying to be part of his group, like he had this experiment of people, which is one movie about him, and it shed a whole new light on him. So not a good person. Okay, so about Yo-Yo Kusama and Narcissus Garden. This is an example of modern performance art, which we haven't seen before. Performance art. So you've read about it. But this is a performance art that was done in 1966, where it wasn't that there's something on a wall in a gallery or a museum and it's static and it's there. Instead, the artist is performing something. This concept was really brought about during the Dada period, where these artists and poets, etc., would do these performances, and oftentimes they were absurd. And so here we have Yo-Yo Kusama, not absurd. She's commenting on narcissism. How so? She has these mirror balls, different versions. The original was in 1966. And so she actually showed up to this gallery and she was selling these mirrored balls. She was not invited to the gallery. She was not one of the artists on display at the gallery. Her performance art was showing up and selling these mirror balls. That in itself was the art, the artwork, the performance of that. The challenging of the notion of the institution of the galleries, etc., of exhibitions, because again, she was invited to it. She wasn't a part of it. She just, was this person selling these balls as a form of performance art. And so it's the commentary on the ego, where, these mirror balls you look into, there's this sense of self-admiration and vanity, all of which she is commenting on, which is still so relevant today, of these very vain pop culture icons, which are just obsessed with the ego. And today with, social media, et cetera, with these totally false, this false sense of reality. And, we're hopefully very aware of all these, influencers, et cetera, that are only paying the best aspects of themselves, life, and it's not reality. And so she's commenting on these early on, with her original performance in 1966. Later, this becomes really popular after her first performance art, and here's a modern installation of these mirror balls on this lake and how they're moving around, and so there's this movement, that same action of that performance art, but not by the artist in this case, but it's still coming through. So here she is with the later one, and she has her larger balls set up, being thanked. She's more known for, you'll probably see kind of references to her for this type of color artwork. Here is Today. Okay. Here's Claes Oldenburg. Lipstick ascending on caterpillar tracks, where we have these sculpture than what we have looked at. So here we have this popular culture aspect of lipstick, but it is on a semi-tank, on caterpillar tracks. And this was an anti-war piece during the Vietnam War, where he's commenting on consumerism and beauty and war. So it was an anti-war piece on, why are we in Vietnam, and the, death of these soldiers, etc. But also the caterpillar tracks are not only associated with but this conveyor belt of consumerism and mass production. And so there's a commentary on this time period. Here he is later. Let's rest it out. So he's more known for these very large scale objects, which we see, extremely large scale of just these normal consumer items. In some museums, you'll see the kind of puffy objects, French fries and ketchup. This has not been seen in art. Elements of fast food material, these, very large, puffy objects. And museum has ones like a face, just a normal, house fan. So he's pulling what's popular, ketchup and fries. This is when this is being mass produced. Think early McDonald's. Here is one of his famous artworks, Spoon Bridge, Sherry, and his wife. So she is named as the artist for this one as well. So it's pop art, but also site specific. So it was made intentionally for this specific site. And we have this spoon and this giant tree. And so it's this commentary on why is it this art? These normal everyday objects. So here's pop art.